Hello, this is Michael Tracy, and this video is going to look at Rob Hall's oxygen bottle use plan, which I will refer to as third on the descent. I will get into the details shortly, but it refers to a plan to climb to the summit and then back to South Summit prior to picking up a third oxygen bottle. This would be in contrast to picking up the third bottle on the ascent and caching your partial bottle at South Summit. This video will outline why such a plan significantly contributed to the deaths in the 1996 disaster, and unlike most of the other major contributing factors, it had nothing to do with altitude. The plan was devised well in advance and should have been apparent that the risk of using such a plan far outweighed the benefits, especially given the composition of climbers on Adventure Consultants in 1996. The analysis will be a bit tedious, but for those who look at the causes of the 1996 disaster as a kind of puzzle to figure out about what went wrong, this will be a major piece in that puzzle, probably the last major piece. If you can stick through to the end, hopefully many of the moving pieces will click into place. But if you are a huge fan of Rob Hall, this video is not for you. The analysis places the entire blame for choosing to use third on the descent on Rob Hall. So what is third on the descent, and why would someone use it? Let's first make a simplified model for climbing the Southeast Ridge route on Everest. Although simplistic, this models the climb for commercial climbers very well. Lou Koschitzky describes the basics in After the Wind. The model is based around an 18-hour worst-case climb, 12 hours to the summit and 6 hours to return. It is modeled on using 3 oxygen bottles, as each oxygen bottle has 6 hours of oxygen at the standard rate of 2 liters per minute. Thus, you use 2 bottles to reach the summit and 1 to return. The model splits the 12-hour climb to the summit into 2 parts of 6 hours each. 6 hours to reach the balcony for a gain of 1,600 vertical feet, and 6 hours to the summit for a vertical gain of 1,400 vertical feet. On the descent, all the times are 1/2 of the climb rates, so 6 hours from summit to South Col. The climber carries 2 bottles, and a Sherpa carries the 3rd bottle to South Summit. Taking 12 hours to get to the summit, you need to pick up your 3rd bottle at South Summit on the ascent, or you will run out of oxygen on the summit and have to descend back to South Summit before you can pick up your final bottle. To solve this problem, you leave your partially full bottle at South Summit. In the simple model, it would be 1/3 full. You then pick up a new bottle, climb to the summit, return back to South Summit where you pick up your 1/3 bottle and climb down. Once the bottle you are using runs out, you switch back to the partial bottle, and that gives you a total of 18 hours of oxygen without having to carry 2 bottles to the summit. That plan I will refer to as third on the ascent. But let us say you are a faster climber, and you can reach the summit in just 10 hours rather than the full 12. The time to descend from the summit to South Summit is, in the simple model, is 1/12 the total time to summit. Thus, you would climb to the summit in 10 hours and return to South Summit in 50 minutes. You would still have oxygen, and then you could pick up your 3rd bottle on the descent without any problem. Now, you would say, but what if there were delays above the Hillary Step and you had to wait? Then you would just run out of oxygen. So wouldn't it be better to simply pick up on the 3rd on the ascent just in case? Yes, it would. So why would anyone use a 3rd on the descent? If you have a large commercial expedition, you will have fast and slow climbers. For the fast climbers, the Sherpas might not be able to get the oxygen in place at South Summit fast enough for the fast climbers to pick it up on the ascent. Thus, if you can get your fast climbers up and down quickly, you can relieve some of the congestion at the Hillary Step, as even fast climbers take some time to scale the step. So the slow climbers in the simple model will be at South Summit in 10 hours on their way up. In order to avoid any cross traffic, the fast climbers need to be back at South Summit prior to 10 hours, all built in a 30-minute buffer. If the fast climbers can reach the summit and return to South Summit in just 9 hours and 30 minutes, they will have the upper mountain entirely to themselves, no one clogging up the Hillary Step either on the way up or the way down. In order for this to work, the fast climbers need to be able to reach the summit in 8 hours and 45 minutes. This will allow them to avoid cross traffic and pick up their bottle on the descent. In fact, the Sherpas will just be depositing their final bottle at South Summit when the fast climbers are returning to pick it up. The problem is that in 1996, none of Rob Hall's clients, not even John Krakauer, were fast enough to reach the summit in 8 hours and 45 minutes. Krakauer was close. We can determine Krakauer's expected time to the summit using the simple model. Now, this data is from Krakauer's book. It is not from the Himalayan database. Krakauer was confused about where some of my data came from in a different video, and I'll yet explain that analysis in an upcoming video. Now, from Krakauer's book, Krakauer started from South Col at 11:35 p.m. the night before. He reached the balcony at 5:30 a.m., and he had a forced 30-minute break because Rob Hall didn't want him getting too far in front of the group. Below the balcony, the ropes had been fixed over a significant portion by the Montenegrins the day before. No ropes at all were installed on May 10th on that section, and Krakauer reported being out in front the entire time. Thus, no delay other than the 30-minute forced wait time can be attributed to any other climber. Breaking trail in that area is a little difficult, but for any fast climbers on any given day, they will always be breaking trail because they will be in front. Adding it all up, Krakauer's actual climb time to the balcony is 5 hours and 25 minutes. Using the simple model, it would be projected to take him roughly 10 hours and 50 minutes to climb to reach the summit. At that time, Krakauer was 42 years old, and this was his first time above 8,000 meters, so it is not unexpected that he would not be fast enough for the third on the descent plan. More problematic is that Rob Hall specifically told Krakauer to slow down, and Krakauer had a 30-minute forced delay below the balcony and a delay from 5:30 to 7:10, or a full 1 hour and 40 minutes waiting on the balcony at Rob's request that no one climb above the balcony until Rob got there. Thus, Krakauer and Ann Dorje had already spent 2 hours and 10 minutes waiting before 7:10 in the morning, and they were still over an hour away from encountering the first fixed ropes that would be fixed that day. Rob Hall enforcing a delay is completely incompatible with the third on the descent plan. The combination of both trying to keep the team together and using a third on descent plan can only be described as a major mistake. If you go through the math for the actual climb times that day for the slower climbers and try to work out any way that the third on the descent could have worked for Krakauer, you will see that it will be closer because the other climbers in 1996 were much slower than the simple model. However, there would still be not enough of a buffer for even Ann Dorje and John Krakauer to have used the third on the descent plan, but I will skip those calculations here. Ultimately, there was no way that anyone on Adventure Consultants could climb third on the descent without running out of oxygen prior to getting back to the cache point. Mountain Madness was not using third on the descent, and every single Mountain Madness client and guide that was using oxygen picked up a third bottle on the ascent. Some received an additional fourth bottle. For the Adventure Consultants teams, Krakauer was confirmed that Michael Groom and Yasko Nava picked up a third bottle on the ascent, and they also picked up a fourth bottle on the descent, though it appears Nava was also a victim of oxygen bottle theft, along with John Krakauer. The change to using 4 bottles for the climbers was because 5 of Rob Hall's clients had turned around, thus leaving significantly more oxygen for the remainder of his team, as well as whomever stole the oxygen. Now, this next part is going to seem rather confusing, because in his response video, John Krakauer said I was right, and I am going to be saying, wait, not so fast. Krakauer also said he himself was reckless, irresponsible, and incredibly stupid, and I will also be saying, wait, not so fast. Nor is this analysis anywhere in between what Krakauer wrote in Into Thin Air and what I had in the South Summit on the Ascent video. It is a different theory based on new facts. This is because when new facts arise, I change my theory to fit the facts. As I will outline, Krakauer said I was correct on the oxygen issue, and he provided some additional confirmation in terms of statements made by Rob Hall. Upon viewing those statements, I now contend that I was not as correct as Krakauer made it out to be. So let's look at the new facts. So first of all, when I call these new facts, it doesn't mean all of them are new. There was a couple people in the comments, and they had actually completed homework assignments on the issue of third on the descent, and they said, hey, it looks like Rob Hall was using third on the descent. First time, I discounted it as it was too difficult for me to believe that Rob Hall would make such a mistake. Gave him another homework assignment. They then came back with additional evidence, and I said, okay, but probably not enough to run a video with. Incredible claims require incredible evidence, and saying Rob Hall made such a catastrophic mistake is indeed an incredible claim, and it requires incredible evidence. In one of his response videos, Krakauer provides the solid evidence that Rob Hall indeed had strongly encouraged third on the descent. This fit in with the other evidence from Lou Kaczynski and others who had said he was indeed using such a plan. And as I update my theory to fit the facts, rather than changing the facts to fit the theory, there is now sufficient confirmation that Rob Hall indeed was using third on the descent. Krakauer said in his video that him waiting to pick up his third bottle until the descent was a huge mistake, and Krakauer attributes that mistake to himself. Ultimately, every climber is responsible for his or her own decisions, but both Krakauer and Harris relied on the guidance of Rob Hall, who was an extremely experienced high-altitude guide. In fact, not listening to Rob Hall could just as easily be described as reckless or irresponsible. It is also difficult for a participant like Krakauer to blame his own oxygen situation on Rob Hall, as it would just come across as blame shifting. However, in my analysis, it is that blame does not lie with Krakauer, but with Rob Hall. It was not realistic for Krakauer to have figured out the problem with the third on the descent plan while he was at 28,700 feet. Under those circumstances, following the predetermined plan dictated by your highly experienced guide is the best thing to do. That the plan ultimately turned out to be fundamentally flawed does not mean that either Krakauer or Harris should have figured all of that out while sitting on South Summit. More problematic is that the oxygen was available at South Summit for them to take up. The only benefit to using third on the descent is that you don't have to wait at South Summit for the Sherpas to bring up your oxygen. It is now established that the oxygen was there when Krakauer and Harris departed. Under those circumstances, not picking up the oxygen was a serious mistake that came from following Rob Hall's instructions not to do so. Unfortunately, it appears Hall followed his own advice and did not pick up a bottle on the ascent. Rob Hall was at South Summit at just after noon, and had he indeed picked up a bottle, it would have lasted another 6 hours till 6 p.m. In addition, Rob would have likely turned the flow down for his extended stay on the summit, as you don't need 2 liters per minute to sit on the summit and wait for someone. Rob Hall reported being out of oxygen well before 5 p.m., so it is very unlikely he picked up a bottle on the ascent. It is not clear whether Doug Hansen did or did not pick up his third bottle at South Summit on the ascent. The decisions to climb third on the descent caused John Krakauer, Andy Harris, and Rob Hall to run out of oxygen above the Hillary Step, which is the obvious result of using a third on the descent plan for anyone but the fastest climbers. Now, I do want to return to my criticism of Into Thin Air. I claim that Into Thin Air was a promotional puff piece for Adventure Consultants, which had an advertising deal with Outside Magazine. Krakauer denies this, noting that nothing in the agreement required any favoritism, and to the contrary actually allowed him to report fairly and objectively. Now let's look at his fair and objective journalism. This is from page 42 of his book. First, Krakauer quotes verbatim an entire advertising brochure from Adventure Consultants, starting, "So, you have a thirst for adventure." Then the next paragraph is Krakauer writing. By 1996, Hall was charging $65,000 a head to guide clients to the top of the world. By any measure, this is a lot of money. It equals the mortgage on my Seattle home, and the quoted price did not include airfare to DePaul or personal equipment. No company's fee was higher. Indeed, some of his competitors charged a third as much. But thanks to Hall's phenomenal success rate, he had no trouble filling the roster for this, his 8th expedition to Everest. If you were hell-bent on climbing the peak, and you could somehow come up with the dough, Adventure Consultants was the obvious choice. First, Hall's client success rate in 1995 was 0%, so it is not clear how that is phenomenal. But the statement, if you are hell-bent on climbing the peak and could somehow come up with the dough, Adventure Consultants was the obvious choice, is hardly objective journalism. Turning to page 399, Krakauer writes, "With so many marginally qualified climbers flocking to Everest these days, a lot of people believe that a tragedy of this magnitude was over too. But nobody imagined that an expedition led by Rob Hall would be at the center of it. Hall ran the tightest, safest operation on the mountain, bar none. A compulsively methodical man, he had elaborate systems in place that were supposed to prevent such a catastrophe." That is entirely a puff piece. You can put it into ChatGPT, just cut and paste it, and ask if it is a puff piece, and you will get an analysis similar to this. Not only is it a puff piece, it is not close to accurate. Hall didn't have any systems in place to prevent a disaster. In 1995, there was no rope-fixing teams sent in advance. They just fixed them as they went along and ended up waiting at South Summit while guide Guy Cotter and Lobsang Jongbu, yes, the same one on Scott Fisher's team in 1996, fixed the rope along the Cornice Traverse. The third on the descent policy was not any type of safety protocol. It is used to get as many people to the summit on a given day as possible while sacrificing the safety of the faster climbers. And people clearly imagined problems happening to an expedition led by Rob Hall, because in 1993, Elizabeth Hawley wrote a piece in the American Alpine Journal highly critical of Rob Hall's expedition. It was Rob Hall's team that Hawley claims was clogging up the Hillary Step, and then the Russians claimed had the incompetent clients. Then there's this piece in Krakauer's book. Analyzing what went wrong on Everest is a useful enough enterprise. It might conceivably present some deaths down the road. But to believe that dissecting the tragic events of 1996 in minute detail will actually reduce the future death in any meaningful way is wishful thinking. The urge to catalog the myriad blunders in order to learn from the mistakes is for the most part an exercise in denial and self-deception. If you can convince yourself that Rob Hall died because he made a string of stupid errors and that you are too clever to repeat those same errors, it makes it easier for you to attempt Everest in the face of some rather compelling evidence that doing so is injudicious. Well, I'm not sure I would call that last one a puff piece. It certainly is shifting the focus away from Rob Hall. As this video hopefully demonstrated, a critical look at Rob Hall's decisions about when to pick up the oxygen bottles could have been useful to other Everest guides and climbers. And in the end, compared to analyzing the flaws of the third on the descent policy, debating whether Bukrev should have climbed with oxygen is like arguing about what music the band should have played while the Titanic was sinking.